Brandon Gustafson, writer for Seattle Sports 710. Brandon, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us here in Sacramento.
Yeah, you bet. No, doing great. I mean, I'm a UW alum, so I'm still riding high from Washington, taking down Oregon on Friday. So I'm feeling great.
Well, I will tell you what, we have some questions for you about that before we get you out of here. But let's start with the Seahawks and Geno. They wrote me off. I didn't write back though. What is the feeling in Seattle? I have some buddies that are fans of the Seahawks, and I told them when the Niners beat the Seahawks on Thanksgiving, maybe this is good for you guys, so there's not any thought of, hey, maybe we can continue to do this with Geno. What's the expectations for Geno and really the Seahawks at this point in the season, and I would say moving forward?
Right. So a lot of people look at Geno's deal and they see like, oh, well, they committed to this guy for 3 years. No, they didn't. It's effectively a 1 year, $25 million deal. They can get out of it relatively easy after this upcoming season. So, this was always kind of that second audition for Geno. He nailed the first one with flying colors. Nobody saw that coming. I don't think the Seahawks saw his last season coming either. But it's definitely an interesting thing because they made the trade for Leonard Williams and they gave up their second round pick. So if they are going to be a team that is in that quarterback conversation when it comes to the draft, the good thing for them is it looks like there's a number of guys that might end up slipping to the middle, bottom half of that first round. And it wouldn't surprise me if this is the year that we finally see them take the quarterback. I mean, Pete and John have been running this thing since 2010, and they've taken two quarterbacks. One of them was Russell Wilson, and the other guy, Alex Magoo, in the 7th round. So that's just nothing that they've ever really done. But I do think that ultimately might change this upcoming NFL draft, and Geno's play has just been kind of like the team, up and down, hot and cold, and kind of as Geno's gone, they've gone, but just really, really inconsistent this year, both sides.
Brandon, before I throw it to Chris over here, can I interest you in a Trey Lance possibly?
Hey, come on now. We're not getting that crazy. I think they'd rather see what the Lock Star has to do.
No, come on. I had to ask.
Brandon, you bring up the Seattle Seahawks drafting a quarterback potentially, and you also mentioned UW. I gotta ask. I mean, what are your thoughts on a potential Michael Penix connection to the Seahawks, and just kind of in general? I think I saw on your Twitter bio that you're a UW alum. What's your thoughts on Penix's draft stock? Where does he fit amongst the quarterbacks in this class? And I mean, at the end of the day, where do you expect him to go in the first round?
Right. He's someone who I think is probably going to be fighting for that 3rd, 4th QB spot in the draft. I think pretty comfortably people are all aboard the Caleb Williams train and Drake May is kind of QB2. But QB3 is up for grabs, and whether that's Michael Penix, whether that's Bo Nix, who I refer to as Check Down Charlie if you actually watch Oregon games, and then Jaden Daniels, who's probably going to end up taking home the Heisman this Saturday. Those three are kind of going to be fighting it out for that 3rd spot. But, I mean, Mike's just done an awesome job up here at UW. The one thing I would definitely point out is he's had elite pass protection, and if he's somebody that does slide into the back half of the first round, maybe that does help him. Maybe he does land in a spot that has a little bit better offensive line situation, because part of the reason that he came to UW and he's a 6th-year guy now is because he had 2 ACL tears. He had 2 season-ending shoulder injuries when he was at Indiana. He was basically broken when he came to Seattle to re-up with Kalen DeBoer. So I think at the end of the day, he's probably going to be picked somewhere in the 20s. He might slip into the early part of the 3rd round, kind of like where, Kaepernick and Dalton and Carr got drafted. But ultimately, he's going to go a lot higher than I think he would have if he would have entered last year's draft.
We're talking to Brandon Gustafson, writer for Seattle Sports 710. And speaking of Check Down Charlie, Brandon, is that what they're calling Brock Purdy up there in Seattle, or is he getting the respect that he deserves like he does here in NorCal? What is the thought process, and what do people feel, or how do people feel about Brock Purdy as a quarterback and for his MVP candidacy?
Right. I think that, me personally, I think I would still lean Dak over Brock at this point for the MVP conversation, but Brock to me is probably 2nd or 3rd in the race. I mean, Brock's got a lot of respect. I think part of it is when you beat a team 3 times in a row, and obviously they beat the Hawks last year before he wound up starting, you're going to get a ton of respect, and the numbers speak for itself. It doesn't hurt to have the playmakers in the O-line, and obviously the guy calling the shots like Shanahan does, but I think there is a lot of respect for Brock Purdy. I'm sure there's a lot of frustration too with Hawks fans, where it's like, oh man, like how is this Mr. Irrelevant guy putting up the numbers he is, and just kind of taking that thing to another level compared to what it had been a little bit over the last few years. But I don't think it's anything where you're looking at Brock Purdy as check down Charlie. The reason I bring that up with Bo Nix is because every Oregon highlight I saw was like, he swings a pass to the flat and nobody's within 15 yards of the guy, and he winds up scoring. And I'm just like, okay, really? Like, Brock at least is doing some things. He's pushing the ball downfield. I mean, that last touchdown he had, I was in the press box for that last game on Thanksgiving. That touchdown he had right over Witherspoon's hands. Quandre was late. I mean, that's just a great throw. He's playing lights out, and I know there's a lot of respect from the Seahawks for what he's doing this year.
Brandon, before we ask you about how the Niners are going to match, or I guess I should say from your perspective, how the Seahawks are going to match up against the Niners, wanted to get your thoughts also on the Niners' big win last weekend against the Eagles. What's kind of your perspective of how the top of the NFC is kind of shaking out right now? The Niners do have a chance with that win. If the Eagles win or lose this Sunday to the Cowboys, the Niners are kind of in a really good position to take that number one seed in the NFC. How do you kind of view the win last week over Philadelphia, and how do you kind of view the top end landscape of the NFC?
Yeah, I mean, it was super, super impressive. They were kind of clicking on all cylinders. Debo was doing just ridiculous Debo things where it seems like nothing's happening, and all of a sudden he's dancing in the end zone. It's like, okay, how'd that happen? But I mean, Brock Purdy, again, he was stellar. This 4-game win streak they're on, starting with Jacksonville, which is a really good team, and we'll see ultimately what happens with Trevor Lawrence. But I mean, Jacksonville entered that game against Cincy a hair away from securing the number one spot in the AFC for the time being, right? So that's kind of where it all started with San Francisco. So at least to me, it seems like they're kind of the cream of the crop right now. Beating up Philly in Philly is super, super impressive considering the kind of 2-year run that the Eagles have been on. I think that overall, when you're kind of looking at it, I think just based on 49ers are getting healthy, the offense is just clicking at a very different level. Obviously, the defense since the bye has just been stellar. I don't think they've given up 20 points at any point over these last 4 games. They're doing their thing, and they at least right now seem like the most complete team in football.
We're talking to Brandon Gustafson, writer for Seattle Sports 710. And Brandon, looking here at the Niners schedule, you have 2 really emotional victories. You had avenging the Thanksgiving Seahawks eating the turkey legs. Then after that, which we had to see everywhere, then after that, they beat the Eagles. We know that was circled on their calendar for the whole season ever since the playoffs. Do you think the Seahawks could pull this off based on maybe the Niners having a letdown game, just because this is maybe the first game where they don't have that emotional connection that they've had? Or do you think, unfortunately, because it is still the Seahawks, and we know Niners and Niner fans can't stand the Seahawks the same way Seahawks and Seahawks fans can't stand the Niners, unfortunately, do you think the Niners will still take care of business?
Right. No, it's a good question. And the Seahawks have a lot of question marks going into this game still. Jordan Brooks, who obviously he had the pick 6 and kind of for a short time turned that game around a little bit on Thanksgiving, made it a little bit closer for Seattle. It's unclear whether or not he's going to play. It does look like Ken Walker, who missed that game, their top running back, is going to be back. But, I mean, it's just clear. You look at the 2 rosters and obviously the way that they've been clicking overall, that the Niners have the edge going into it, and obviously going down to Santa Clara does not help the Seahawks in this situation. But there's another thing that's kind of interesting to look at with this game. And the Hawks have never lost 4 games in a row under Pete Carroll. He's been there since 2010, and they're on a 3-game losing streak right now. They've lost 4 or 5, so I'm sure that's kind of in the back of their minds too. I mean, they're trending into uncharted territory for Pete up here during his time in Seattle. And I mean, drawing a 49ers team that again is playing as well as anybody in football, and is coming off just 2 absolute thumpings of 2 teams that they despise. I mean, I don't think that's kind of the ideal landing spot for Pete and his guys right now.
Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully, I don't know, there might be a 3rd meetup just like there was last season. But if there is, we will definitely have to have you on again.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
That
Brandon.
was Brandon Gustafson, writer for Seattle Sports 710. Got to get to a break. When we get back,